Hello and welcome back, everybody, to day 2 of Regional Championship number 9 here in Melbourne, Australia. I'm Jim Dowling. I'm joined by Thomas Anderson.
Yep.
How did you find yesterday? There was a lot of interesting Magic decks around, a lot of strong players.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost more than we could cover on commentary, right?
Yeah.
Like the matches we got to see yesterday, extraordinary. If you haven't seen the coverage from that, it'll all be available on Twitch and YouTube. Make sure you check out the VOD. So there's some awesome plays. I don't want to be like lost to history, but even the decks that made it through were such an interesting selection, a real kaleidoscope of standard excellence that we're going to get served up for us today in top 8.
Yeah. So let's have a look quickly at what these players were playing for. We had 222 players in the room yesterday, playing for some cash prizes, some Pro Tour qualifications, and that coveted invite to Worlds. We know 2 of the people on the Australian Worlds team for this year, being James Moore and Thomas Bott. We're going to find out who our 3rd player is.
Yeah, and there's every chance there'll be someone who doesn't have a ton of previous international Magic experience, right, Jim? Just looking at our top 8 today, a lot of real up-and-coming qualifiers, as well as, of course, some real old heads. So a mix of experience and perhaps innovation that's going to give us some exciting top 8 matches.
Yeah, we've got a wide variety, as you mentioned. We've got people that are playing in their first RC. We've got people that have travelled here from overseas that have grinded for years on this stuff. We've got local heroes who have played in multiple Pro Tours. It's really a mixed bag in that room. And our top 8 has all of that to show. We have in the 5th seed, I believe, Trevor Georges, who's qualified for his first ever Pro Tour off the back of making the top 8 today. He's pumped. He's been trying for years. He's been, winning LCQs to qualify for these events.
Yeah, it's amazing how you can kind of toil with like all of that effort and all of the skill of, someone who perhaps has had a bit more success or been in a better spot, but the dice don't fall your way. And you end up kind of just unknown below the surface, except for in the local community. And then suddenly this is your time to shine. This may be your one, I don't want to curse anybody, but this may be your one best shot to make it to the next level.
On the other end of the spectrum, we have players like Justin Chung, who's been playing Magic at the top level for well over a decade now.
Yeah, if Justin takes out our top 8 today and takes that Worlds invite, it will be the second RC I've covered that he has won. So in terms,
nobody will be surprised.
Exactly, this is a real old head of the scene.
And then we have players like Ben Tudman, who's played 2 Pro Tours in the past 5 years, second at RC2. Just a storied history in recent history of that player just winning lots of events.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I love the narrative you painted yesterday when he was on coverage for that round 5, where, bringing the expertise from the Sydney scene to the Melbourne scene, raising the level of local play. And I mean, this is setting the bar quite high, already qualified for top 8. And I'm feeling confident, I believe, about the chances of his deck in the top 8.
Well, we're going to be covering 4 versus 5, which is going to be Benjamin Graves from New Zealand and Trevor Georges, a local player. We can have a peep at their deck lists here. We have Benjamin Graves playing Rakdos midrange. We saw him on camera in round 8 yesterday.
I was a little bit jealous of you, to be honest, that you were the one who got to end up covering this deck, because I'd been looking at it all afternoon. I mean, you obviously, you want to cover the top tables, you want to cover the known players, the likely narratives, but in the background, there was this little Rakdos deck at X and 1. I'm like, if Benjamin keeps winning, if this deck keeps winning, this is the only deck of its kind in the room. And I mean, looking at this was not on anyone's standard bingo card, I don't think, for top 8. 4 Alicia, who laughs at fate. 4 Tiny Bones, the pickpocket. Both Mishra claimed by Gix and Phyrexian Dragon Engine, Jim. If we get to see a merge happen on main stage in the feature match area of top 8, I'll be overjoyed.
So good. And that one of Combustible Gear Hulk, a pile of fair cards as well, Harvester of Mystery, Trumpet Incarnosaur, Anoint with Affliction, the regular powerful removal and interaction you need to have a baseline, where you can have a game against any deck.
Yeah, it's some of the tools we've seen in other mid-range decks, but a completely different approach to how it actually aims to close the game or gain advantage. I'm staring at that one-of Wild Ride and all the ability to discard, not to fuel a Prof Eidetic Memory or an Oculus, but seemingly just set up a more old-fashioned kind of out-of-the-graveyard, sudden haste attack plan. And it's so exciting to have had it make all the way to top 8 with a pretty impressive string of wins yesterday.
On the other side of the table, we've got Trevor Georges, local player playing the big bad of the format. Is it Prowess? 26% of the room yesterday. It's the deck that all of the best players seem to be playing. Everyone wanted to be playing this, or at least having a plan to beat it. We see 8 main deck creatures, 4 Corey Steelcutter, of course, for Storm Chaser's talent, and then a slew of 1 mana spells to make sure you can cast 2 spells in a turn and grow these creatures.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have the most popular deck in the format, sometimes you have the best deck in the format, or the deck that is the preference of high-level players for being the most expressive, perhaps, of their skill. Rarely is one deck all three of those, but it does seem like Is It Prowess qualifies. It ticks all those boxes. The number of choices you get densely packed into even the first few turns of a game. The ability to play a long game, surprisingly, with 4 stock-ups and the later active abilities of Storm Chaser's talent. We saw a lot of different situations which the Is It Prowess deck can win from, and I'm really excited by not only the the bulk of results it posted yesterday, but the fact that the 2 copies that actually qualify to top 8 are both a little bit different from what you'd call the true stock list. They seem to be pre-sideboarded, a step ahead of both the mirror and what the rest of the field is doing to adapt to Is It Prowess.
Quick look at the bracket here. As I said, we'll be featuring 4 versus 5, Benjamin Graves versus Trevor Georges. In the 1v8, we have Sam Lewis versus Itai Waterson. Sam playing the Orzhov Pixie deck that we saw yesterday against Itai on Oculus. 3rd and 6th bracket, we have Jennifer Rose Holloway on Demir midrange against Ben Tudman, who is playing Oculus as well. And then in the 2v7, we have Sam Loy on Gruul Delirium against Justin Chung playing Is It Prowess. So we are still seeing these sort of most represented decks in the room, also represented in the top 8.
Yeah, you couldn't really draw it up any more exciting from a coverage perspective to have, as you said, you do have representation from the known good decks. People want to see what really top-level Oculus and Prowess play looks like. But the fact that Gruul Delirium and Red-Black Discard midrange both made it through this far and look strongly positioned, right? Like this Red-Black midrange deck, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it had a pretty good matchup against Is It Prowess on day 1. Now, granted, maybe not against this caliber of Is It Prowess player, but it's not as though these decks have just kind of like fallen over the line and will be washing them away in the quarterfinals, kind of fait accompli.
Well, we've rambled long enough. We're going to get down to the table and see some action. All right, welcome down to the table. On the top of the screen, we have Benjamin Graves, Rakdos midrange, this Mishra, this Phyrexian Dragon Engine monstrosity. On the bottom here, we have Trevor Georges playing Is It Prowess.
Yeah, both players, looking pretty comfortable considering I think the night's rest has done a world of good, I'm sure, for most of these players if they're able to get sleep with the nerves of the day. But that's, part of making top 8 and part of the challenge of these like weekend-long qualifier events. You do have to have the kind of mental stamina to be on your best game all throughout. And I'm not saying that Trevor is not in that mindset, looking very relaxed there, but it must be cool for someone like Benjamin to have brought your pet deck. No one else in the room is playing it. I don't know that it has a lot of results posted, even online, and to be so firmly validated by your day 1 results, and now you're kind of playing with house money here in top 8.
Do you think that Benjamin gets an advantage here from the time zone difference? Benjamin, of course, a New Zealand player, 2 hours ahead. So, we're at almost midday local time. It's a crisp 2 p.m. for Benjamin.
He certainly looks fully awake and relaxed, so perhaps so, Jim. Yeah, up here bright and early at the event, and as you said, kind of mentally ahead of someone like Trevor, but I don't know that that's really the case. These Is It Prowess players, they're very sharp. The deck requires a lot of quick thinking and a lot of quick counting, as we saw yesterday, and Trevor has looked really confident all weekend, seeing, between matches, talking to people, getting data, commiserating with teammates, and, to be one of only a couple of Is It Prowess players from the huge number who were here on Saturday morning to still be in the tournament says something to the quality of his play, even though we haven't managed to feature him on coverage just yet.
He's got a ripper of an opening hand here. I'm seeing 2 lands, a cutter, a Storm Chaser's Talent, 2 Swift Spears, and an Opt. We have almost 4 separate threats and an Opt to find more.
Yeah, it's a lot of gas for a deck like Red-Black to deal with where you expect there's not the temporary lockdown to play around. It's going to be 1-for-1 exchanges, or perhaps in Benjamin's case, maybe just finding a big enough blocker that it actually does kind of force the Prowess deck to stay home for a turn or 2 while it builds up, combat tricks. You're not having the Monstrous Rage at least, so if there is some sort of effective defense presented, it won't get bounced or trampled over immediately. That might be something for Benjamin to do, but already being on the mulligan here against what we see to be such a strong hand from Trevor, the momentum bar is starting a little bit in the Is It player's favor.
Yeah, Benjamin is on the play, of course. Higher seed in these top cut. Normally has the choice of play or draw, so Benjamin has chosen to go first. Looks like he's happy with a 6. I see a land, a Tiny Bones, a second land. I believe that's
Another
an
Tiny
Anoint
Bones?
with Affliction as well.
Yeah, and maybe another Tiny Bones at the back of the hand there, although it's hard to see really. But it's a Death Touch blocker on one. You could have worse openings. Notably, put the Singleton Colstoke Gearhulk back on the bottom of the deck there. So not understandably a very expensive and kind of complicated to cast card. That's for later on,
Yeah.
and possibly even for discarding more than it is for hard casting from hand. But again, I didn't get to cover this deck yesterday. How did it look actually on the feature match area?
Yesterday, the only time that we saw the Colstoke being drawn, it was also put away for a mulligan. It is really good at, growing the fear of missing out, reaching the delirium count there. And as you mentioned, it's not a card you need in your opening hand. You really want to draw it later. Unfortunately, being on the bottom of the library, I don't think we actually have any ways of shuffling here.
Oh, well.
So won't be seeing that card in this game specifically. So turn 1 Tiny Bones into turn 1 Swift Spear, into turn 2 Inti, into turn 2 Corey Steel Cutter. These are sort of defining cards for both of these decks.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that Trevor, obviously, as you mentioned, kind of a threat-heavy hand, and so inclined perhaps to sequence it by laying out those prowess creatures first and then going for one big turn of attacks where you can opt into another spell. But I feel like that gives Benjamin a bit more breathing room here because you can see we're able to already start building up the Inti, and Trevor having to have a look at the card here, making sure that you understand the sequence of triggers that goes on whenever this card or another card you have attack. And with Tiny Bones back to block on defense and that Anoint with Affliction in hand, Benjamin at least feels like he's got a couple of layers of play, ensuring himself against the kind of worst case scenario from these prowess decks.
Yeah, Inti is a card that, you can read it, you can be sure that you understand its abilities, and then if you read it again, some of the abilities have changed, or the way that they function has changed. So always a good card to double check. You mentioned that sequencing this hand is a little bit open to interpretation, with 3 1-drops, one of them being a cantrip, and then a 2-cost that really wants you to play 2 spells on the same turn. Your decisions of which spells you play in which order really shape the game. So Trevor has elected to go with no attack on turn 2, just get the Corey Steel Cutter down, and now playing out the second Monastery Swift Spear and the Opt, solidifying that Monk that is in play, ready to go. So we've got 3 creatures in play with prowess. They're all 2 power currently.
Yeah, but I like what Trevor's doing because the question you're asking yourself here is there's a Tiny Bones across the field with Death Touch. So whatever attack you make, you might be losing a creature for it. And so even if into the Floodmoor, we've seen this be maybe the highest impact game swinging card out of these Izzet decks. If you play that on a 1-drop, it's just coming right back down with no real loss of resource or tempo for Benjamin. So Trevor, with Burst Lightning and Into the Floodmoor in hand, seems to be setting up the highest possible payoff of damage from a row of prowess creatures for that one big turn we can go, okay, bounce your 1 blocker, lightning your 2nd blocker, get in for 8-10 damage and really kind of take a strong forward position in this game.
Instead electing to just go for the attack for 6 currently,
Okay.
but that can always spin up some more.
Still holding 1 mana as well, so has options here obviously as both players are aware there's tons of 1 mana spells that Trevor could have to change the outcome of this combat, but looks like he's just letting it go.
I'd be worried putting this Tiny Bones into the graveyard here. You know that your opponent is playing Alesha, and has the ability to just pull that card out of the graveyard at will, especially when you don't have a blocker right now. This Inti could get into the red zone, trigger that raid ability on Alesha in the end step if there was one lurking in hand.
Yeah, it's a tricky kind of compromise to navigate as Benjamin, I imagine, against what is, I think, clearly a more aggressive opponent in the Izzet deck, to keep attacking to trigger some of these raid-type abilities or Inti's ability, which also triggers on attack. You don't want to give up on these engines. They're essential to how the deck is built, but you do need to make sure you have some blockers as well, and I guess that's the real glue role that Tiny Bones fulfills, holding the deck together as just an effective, cheap blocker. Inti coming into attack again here, clearly wanting to maintain that velocity, trade out bad cards for good, and put some pressure on Trevor's life total. We said that the Izzet deck can play a long game. You have to let them know they can't just hang around forever and greed as much as possible. And are we seeing a duress here, exiled and potentially cast off Inti?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be super stoked to play that here. Sort of reduce the chance of double spelling for Trevor on the following turn. Your opponent has 5 cards in hand, but it's the second spell for turn that is the most important for these decks with this Cutter in play. And we do see the hand here. We see Storm Chaser's Talon into the Floodmoor, a 3rd Monastery Swift Spear, and a Burst Lightning. Of course, the Duress not able to take the Monastery Swift Spear, and I don't think there's a really good answer for which of these other 3 you take.
I think Into the Floodmore has to be the take here, surely. It's interesting that Trevor, I mean, I don't think it's incorrect, of course, for Trevor to allow this to resolve. Bouncing the Inti at this junction, and if it just gets replayed with those two available mana, doesn't make that much of a difference compared to bouncing a blocker on a future turn. But that's the card that can blow you out the most here. So I guess it depends how close does Benjamin feel with his deck that he is to turning the corner. He has beaten a lot of Izzet players on the way to the top 8, so clearly has a strong game plan against them, a clear idea of which of these cards has the most potential to impact the game, and takes the Burst Lightning instead. So a removal spell, but also taking away the opportunity to push extra face damage, and a follow-up Deep Cavern Bat now here daring the Into the Floodmore, but that explains the taking of Burst Lightning, clearly.
Yeah, you know, the Burst Lightning had no interest in getting rid of this Inti, but the Bat, of course, a very good target for the Burst Lightning. And here we see the Bat being bounced in response, which means that the hand is revealed, a card is exiled for 0 seconds, so it's not actually exiled at all.
Depending on the draw here, this looks like a great position for Benjamin, because other than this one unknown card that Trevor's just picked up, the hand that remains doesn't represent that much damage to you. So at 16 life, you've got a window here to maybe turn the corner, although Swift Spear from Trevor, presenting a ton of prowess creatures if there's any more gas in the tank.
Wow, well, there's still a Storm Chaser's talent in hand. Surely you commit that here as well, right?
Yeah,
And
it's not
there it
lethal,
is,
but it's a lot of damage.
That is an absurd amount of prowess creatures. So this is the first prowess trigger for any of them. That's going to be 2 power, 2 power, 2 power, 2 power, 2+1 for the equipment. This is an attack for 11.
Yeah, everything except that Otter somehow manages to have haste thanks to the way that Corey Steelcutter works, and of course, good old Monastery Swift Spear as reliable as ever. This is a lot of damage, so I don't know if this is worst case scenario for Benjamin, but you were prepared, you were going to take a lot of damage right here. It comes down to what do you have left in hand and how much mana do you have available to you next turn. It's going to take probably a couple of spells to shore up your life total here, because I don't think there's a way for you to quickly get back out of burst damage range in this red-black list.
Now, the thing with this prowess deck, right, is that Trevor's either going to draw an interactive spell here or a land and then have the ability to spin up this Storm Chaser's talent to level 2, ready to get back more interaction from the graveyard for a future turn.
Yeah, and we've seen that be game-ending in other situations, but at the very least, if you spin up this talent with exactly 4 mana, that's a sigh of relief for Benjamin. That's as close as you get to like a brick for the turn, because you're not immediately dead.
So Benjamin looks like he's drawn the 4th land here. Of course, there is a 5 cost that would get him out of this, being the one of Harvester of Misery in the deck. But nothing at 4, no Damnation, unfortunately. There could be some Pyroclasms in the sideboard, something along those lines. But this is looking scary. This Inti has attacked on all of the previous turns, but not this turn. This is definitely having to sit back on defense now, unfortunately.
You have a ton of spot removal available as Benjamin. The question is, of course, with so many cheap, small creatures, the effectiveness of an Anoint with Affliction or Torch the Tower or the discard abilities of Harvester of Misery and Trumpeting Carnosaur are all kind of at minimum power. You're only going to pick off a couple of damage from one of these prowesses at a time. You're about to be attacked by 6 creatures, all of which could represent multiple damage very easily. And
Trevor with a stock up off the top of the deck. This is about the best card you could ask for. This could be a land and another 1-cost spell for another Corey Steelcutter trigger.
yeah, it could miss, but the chances are quite good that it doesn't with just how this deck is constructed. And you can see Benjamin kind of rocked back by that play, of course, like not something that you've played into, nothing you could have really done about it, but this is maybe the worst case scenario, especially if one of these cards is a second source of trample. Obviously, right now you've only got the 1 Steelcutter, but more than one of these creatures going over a blocker, especially at instant speed, is going to absolutely seal the game. A lot of things probably would, to be fair.
So we do see land number 4.
Into the Floodmore.
And an Into the Floodmore.
That's got to be all she wrote.
And surely that is enough.
Damn.
Wow. What an incredible aggressive game from Trevor here.
But it's controlled aggression.
Yeah, really just showing off this deck's ability to hit the red zone, hit it fast. That was all 4 Monastery Swift Spears and the Corey Steelcutter, which triggered multiple times. That would have been the 3rd trigger that turn, I believe.
Yeah, it feels like it maybe would have been, that's like the best section of the deck to draw against a very removal-heavy 1-for-1 focused red-black list. You're fast, you get under all the funny late-game graveyard stuff. You're not relying on the slower cards like Drake Hatcher that Trevor and our other top 8 Izzet player, Justin Chung, are kind of pre-boarding to help deal with other matchups. You're just kind of going quick and making those removal spells sort of as difficult to play for value as possible. And we saw, unfortunately, things like, Ben drawing the discard part of the deck, including those Deep Cavern Bats, sort of after there were still valuable targets here. Got value from a couple of them, really held up put up a good fight, but yeah, you were really hoping to get that Harvester or something, because without that kind of big play, you're not buying your way back into the game, and has to hope he can turn it around in game 2 and 3.
Let's have a look at the sideboards. Benjamin losing game 1 there. Benjamin has access to Brotherhood's End, some more discard spells, some more pointed removal spells, an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, a Ghost Vacuum, and a Case of the Crimson Pulse. What are we feeling here? What do you think are the slam dunks to bring in this matchup?
It's really interesting, of course, because there's a few different angles you could take here. You could probably cut a number of the more expensive spells. I'm not exactly sure what Ben shaves. I wasn't here watching that last feature match. But Brotherhood's End seems like a pretty good answer in most situations. 3 damage board wipe, a bit bigger than the Pyroclasm you speculated on. It's tough for the Izzet deck to play around. Bringing in the vacuums, I suppose, to help deal with the Storm Chaser's talent late game you mentioned.
Sure.
I would have thought that there's maybe some argument for Dreadmore's Ire against Corey Steelcutter. I'm not sure what else you have that in the board for, but it's possible that you're just limited in how many slots you want to take out of the deck. That's always a consideration.
And then let's have a look over at the other side of the match at Trevor's sideboard. We have access to a Rel, some Drake Hatches and Sunspine Links. Some more targeted removal here. Plenty of removal in the sideboard there, actually, and some Ghost Vacuums. Trevor, I'm imagining we're going to see at least the Ghost Vacuums come in, right? You've got to be scared of this Alesha. You've got to be scared of this Tiny Bones.
Well, we didn't see much fear of the Alesha in game 1, but we also didn't see the graveyard part of the deck. So I guess it depends. Do you, a game up, do you even potentially push your luck and try and, dodge that part of the deck again or go under it? But maybe on the draw, you do respect it a little bit more, right? Your opponent's going to have more chance to get that running. If you think the Ghost Vacuum's worth bringing in, even at the cost of maybe slightly slowing down your own plan, this deck finds a lot of damage, so that's probably viable. Other than that, I guess you just want to be able to get rid of those early blockers. We did see Tiny Bones and Inti kind of stonewall the monks for a while, even if they got through in the end. So maybe bringing in the efficient stuff like a Braids and Torch the Tower will help out there and let you get things like Drake Hatcher in where they can really generate value.
I've got word of some of the scores from the other top 8 matches. I've heard that Itai Watterson is up a game against Sam Lewin. That's our Oculus versus Pixie matchup. Oculus up a game there. And Samuel Loy is up a game against our 7th seed. That is Gruul Delirium ahead of Juzza. So 1-0 to Sam over Juzza currently. Still waiting. I haven't heard any solid match results, but we now know 3 of the game 1 results.
Yeah, a lot of fast decks here in this top 8. So, there's an outside chance someone could have already, sort of packed their lunch for the semifinals. But no, lots of good players. I'm really interested in all of these outcomes. Slightly sad we don't get to see all of them, especially that third table, Jennifer Rose Holloway on Demir Midrange against Ben Tudman on Oculus. We saw both of those players in the feature match area yesterday, and they looked so in command of their respective decks. It's a shame only one of them can advance, but that's just how these tournaments work. When you get to the top 8, it is brutal.
The good news is we're going to be featuring both semifinals and the final. So we're going to have a lot of magic here as these players finish up with their sideboarding. Looks like Trevor just deciding on some final cuts here. Who do you think is favoured in the matchup between this Dark Horse Rakdos mid-range deck and this the deck to beat? Is it Prowess?
It's probably the hardest question for me to answer based on sort of theory all weekend, because I have never seen anyone play this kind of Rakdos list remotely before. This was not, I'll be honest, this was not in my prep, Jim. But the fact is that this Rakdos deck on the way to the finals played against 6 aggro players, 1 mono red, 5 Izzet, and I think only lost once to Juzza, who is obviously a very high quality Izzet player. It is noteworthy, I guess, that version of the Izzet list is basically the same as Trevor's. It's got the same slight tweaks from the stock list, so maybe that advantages, Justin and Trevor. But I think it might just be variance there. And when you've won so many other matches, I feel like Benjamin, even down a game against a strong player, would have to still have a bit of confidence on his side. This sideboard plan hopefully streamlines you a little bit. You'd have to mulligan in game 1 there as well. So you've got a lot of equity to gain back here just as soon as game 2 starts.
Well, we're here at Regional Championship 9 here in Melbourne, Australia. Of course, we had some results out of the United States Regional Championship last week and the European Regional Championship the week before that, as well as the Champions Cup, the Japanese and Korean tournament last week as well. We've had a little bit less prowess in the room than those events had. The one 2 weeks ago had 16%, but last weekend's events had 35% prowess. We dropped it down to 26%, but I've got to tell you, they converted pretty well into day 2.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting set of numbers to follow. You're right, Jimbo, because of course it seemed like worldwide this prowess deck has just been soaring and soaring and soaring. It almost seems as though, oh, well, the real cap on how many people play this deck in the room is just how many people can find 4 Corey steel cutters and 4 stock ups in an environment where those cards are highly sought after. But even given the sort of difficulty of obtaining those cards in Australia, there was a ton of Izzet prowess in the room on Friday for the LCQ. Obvious reasons to choose a deck like that for that kind of fast-paced, rapid-fire re-queuing environment. And yet, as soon as the actual tournament started on Saturday, there was much more diversity in the room. And as you said, even though a lot of them did make it close to the top 8, a lot of 6-2 Izzet players actually improved their meta share compared to the start of the day. Only 2 of them in top 8, which I think about works out to
That's
the
25%,
the quarter of the field they were to begin with. It all kind of neatly arrives where we are now.
The people that didn't make it too well into the Saturday, the Zur Overlords players dropped from 10% of the field down to 3% once we look at just the winners from yesterday, as well as the Demons players, Mono Black and Orzhov. Pretty good showing for the tournament, but they didn't end up making it to the 6-2 or better bracket, unfortunately. It was all just expected decks, and then of course some amount of this, this Rakdos mid-range that no one saw coming, the Cruel Delirium taking away seats from what we expected to see at the top tables. It's been very cool to watch.
Yeah, I'm obviously, as a coverage guy, I'm always inclined to root for these cool fringe decks. It would have been nice, though, to see the Zero Overlords, because that deck is an important part of the meta, and I don't think that we're throwing it out or anything on the basis of this weekend's results, just because there's no copies in the top 8, and it didn't convert quite as well as expected to those X2 brackets even. There were a lot of X2 Zer. I think there were 3 or 4 X2 Zer players. There were a bunch of players on things like, Jeskai Control in that area as well. So the good decks remain good, but they just seem to not quite have the oomph to get over the line, even with some very, very skilled and storied players piloting those lists and, pre-sideboarding or adjusting for the metagame. They were felled in the end. The Izzet prowess field took a lot of scalps, I think.
All right, it looks like these players are finished shuffling their opponent's deck, so they're ready to draw their own 7s. Let's see if we can snipe some information from them.
Yeah.
A very good look at Trevor's hand, but let's see what we can find from Benjamin here.
Yeah, we mentioned Benjamin hasn't seemingly necessarily had a lot of experience in these sorts of high-pressure environments. He's got a little bit of a, took a while to shuffle there, a little bit of slip up. Just wants to steady himself, take a deep breath, make sure this is a good 7. You'd love to see a very competitive game 2 here. And I don't know if this represents a keep or not. Both players looking...
Yeah, Trevor's hand there, 1 land. It was a tapped land.
Yeah.
Just a little too slow. No cantrip to find that second land either. Benjamin, I didn't see much. I saw 1 gold card and I didn't see anything else in the hand, but he's happy. He's signified, yeah, this 7 will do. Trevor going back for a 6 instead.
You'd love to see the sigh of relief. He looks at the 7, and all right, and then move back to the life pad. No mulligan this game. No, the horror story of you make day 2, you show up to the Coburg Town Hall, you're ready for a great magic story as part of your journey, and then you sort of crash out of the top 8 immediately with some bad openers. It happens. Variance is a huge part of Magic the Gathering, and controlling it is a key skill, but. We're all rooting, I think, for a competitive game too, and this is a deck at least mulligans fairly well, it seems, even for a deck that spends a lot of 1 mana instants.
One more update from the side tables. Side tables? Well, there's only 4 tables.
The other top
One more
8
update
tables.
from the other top 8 tables. Samuel Loy 2-0 with Gruul Delirium, knocking out Justin Chung on Izzet Prowess. That is a big name removed from the top 8.
This Cruel Delirium deck, arguably, I mean, if this red-black deck isn't the story of the weekend, like just going from strength to strength, not totally unknown. I think people have been dabbling with various forms of this Cruel Delirium, but the consistency of the results here from Samuel really implies that he's found the exact right recipe, the real chef's kiss. This is the blend of different card types. These are the Delirium cards you want to play, and it's in an environment where the other red-green aggro decks and aggro decks in general have not overperformed at all. To see this Delirium build being the one that works out is great.
So Trevor there looking at a second hand with 0 lands in it this time. So we're going back. We're looking for a 5-card hand here. The good news for Trevor, of course, is that he's up a game. So even if the variance is against him during this game, he does have this one in the pocket. And we saw in that previous game that, the power level of this deck, of the cards in this deck, you can definitely win off a 6. You can definitely win off a 5 as well.
Yeah, and I guess you have the advantage of if this was a prowess versus prowess mirror, you don't have a lot of time to try and make up for that lack of initial cards in hand. But the red-black deck, I mean, it's very good at dealing with individual threats, but it's probably not going to put so much pressure on Trevor that he won't have some time to piece together a plan. You know, if this opener, if you're able to get a Corey Steelcutter down without it getting, you know, duressed away out of hand, if you're able to get the Storm Chaser's talent in, some of these cards that have a bit more legs for the late game, we saw in game one how Trevor was able to sort of gradually assemble an attack force and then punch through for a ton of damage explosively. It's that flexibility of tempo that makes the ANZ deck so strong.
Yeah. More word from our other tables. Itai and Sam going into game 3. Jennifer on Demir midrange up a game.
Wow.
All right, let's have a look at the third hand here for Trevor. See
Lands
if
and
we
spells,
can find...
come on.
Yeah, that's right. We want at least one land, at least a...
Oh,
There's one land
that's
there.
a land.
Okay, a Shivan Reef. We've got a stock up that can probably go back. We've got a lot of removal here. I'm seeing 2 Torch the Tower, a Monstrous Rage, a Burst Lightning. I don't know what that blue card... Oh, it's a Ghost Vacuum.
That was a decent keeper, right?
So nothing proactive. It looks like we're keeping the land, 2 removal spells, Ghost Vacuum, Monstrous Rage.
I mean, maybe if the Monstrous Rage was a creature, you'd be happier, but...
You'd be very happy with this 5 if the Monstrous Rage
Absolutely.
was a creature.
If you're already down 2 cards, you need the game to go long for you to kind of recover from that start, and multiple pieces of 1 mana interaction, as well as Ghost Vacuum to stop the graveyard plan running away with things is ideal. But now you also have to deal with the fact that Benjamin's on the play and opens with duress. That's a beating.
Yeah, look, whenever you mulling into 5 and your opponent has a discard spell, you almost consider just shuffling up and going for the next game here. Benjamin, with all of the information, knows what he has to play through and play around. Can choose to take one of the 2 removal spells if he's holding exactly 2 threats, perhaps. Can choose to take the Ghost Vacuum if those threats are graveyard reliant. The Monstrous Rage, I think you're absolutely fine to leave in hand here. There's no threat. There's no worry of what is going to happen next.
Is that a Spell Pierce?
That is a Spell Pierce, yeah. So there won't be a follow-up discard spell. We can tell you that much.
I mean, I suppose it'd still be a 1-for-1 trade, but yes, is that okay? And Brotherhood's End in hand, it looks like for Benjamin. You can't really see those cards as well, but if you're Trevor here, right, game planning from Trevor's side, what does it take for me to get back in this match? A slow hand from Ben and the ability for me to, you know, hold up some key interaction to stop whatever impactful spells he does have is where you need to be at. There's just the question of Ben confidently leaving that Ghost Vacuum around, clearly not that bothered by the idea of his graveyard getting hated out, so long as he can, you know, get through any early interaction and maybe put Trevor down to low life before he's able to, you know, draw into more lands and get back to playing a normal game.
Yeah, Ben's got a super reactive hand here as well. There's an Inti, and then there's a Anoint with Affliction, 2 Brotherhood's Ends, and I believe there's a Go for the Throat.
That looks like an Alicia, right?
There.
There's a second card in hand.
As well as Alicia, yeah.
So clearly understands there's a second Torch the Tower in hand, happy to run out this Inti, and that's like, I'm sure Trevor understands that there's layers behind this play, but also can't really afford to leave it around. So that's the second Torch the Tower fired off, and now Benjamin must be thinking it's probably safe for Alicia to get in, especially with nothing around to be bargained up. If Alicia can even get 1+1/+1 counter on it, just sort of 1 turn of breathing room, it might start to run away with the game here.
So the good news, for Trevor at least, is that Torch the Tower does in fact exile that Inti.
Yes.
You've always got to be worried, you know, if I'm just killing this creature, is it just going to come back next turn? You know, there's an Alicia, it could come back anytime in the future, but that Inti is gone, removed from the game, in the exile zone. And Trevor, great draw for turn there. A sleight of hand, gets to look at 2 off the top and lock in that extra land.
Yeah, so the Ghost Vacuum now coming down. That second land, huge for Trevor. Great to be able to find that off the slide. But Ben already kind of knew that Alicia's graveyard ability probably wasn't going to be most impactful part of the card this game, having already seen and chosen to leave around the Ghost Vacuum from earlier. But, you know, she is a growing threat on her own in a game that's as slow as this one's shaping up to be. That could be the deciding factor, obviously, into the Floodmore. As always, a very impactful bailout spell Trevor could easily find here. It's nice to be playing a cantrip-heavy deck in this kind of situation, I guess, although your mana is limited. Less so now.
Well, there's at least 1 stock up on the bottom of the library from the mulligan, but now having a 3rd land, like a stock up here, would really just give Trevor a lot of tools to keep this game going. Benjamin's still with a very removal-heavy hand. I can see 2 Brotherhood's End. I believe that's another Duress there drawn as well as that Anoint with Affliction. So having that extra Duress is a really nice safety measure here. At this point, you know your opponent has Monstrous Rage. You don't know the other 2 cards in hand.
I think you're about to know one of them. Oh, Is Trevor thinking twice about this? It seems like a great time to play the Steel Cutter.
Yeah, interesting. And he may be considering casting Monstrous Rage on Alesha. Decides not to, which is
Ooh.
probably the better option.
I don't know how desperate I am to get a Monk token if I'm going to give a creature that gets bigger every turn trample permanently.
Yeah, I think it's okay if you're holding a Into the Floodmaw, but that's not the world that Trevor's in right now.
Trevor's like, no, I can play a bit longer than that.
Brotherhood's End, choosing to not...
But the Spell Pierce chose not to. Do we still have the second duress on hand? So Benjamin choosing to run out that Brotherhood's End. I mean, it would have been a massive haymaker if it connected, right? The Destroy All Artifacts mode, I assume, is what was being gone for there to clean up both the Steel Cutter and the Ghost Vacuum in one fell swoop. But Trevor just having the right kind of clinging to life tenaciously here with these 1-mana interaction spells all coming through at the right time. But game obviously still in Ben's favor, attacking there with that Alesha growing it to a 3/3 and threatening to continue that kind of action. And now we see that play you described. Trevor clearly hasn't found any better actions.
Okay, so casting Monstrous Rage. He appears to be holding priority to ensure that, before this Monstrous Rage resolves, I also want to cast this Abrade.
Yeah.
Triggering the Corey Steel Cutter. We are going to get a Monk here. I think Benjamin might have been happy to roll out that Brotherhood's End and potentially get it countered because there's a second one in hand.
That would explain it.
Being able to nab this Corey Steel Cutter, this Ghost Vacuum. Unfortunately, Trevor is going to be left with a Monk here, so Benjamin doesn't clean up every card. And I think Trevor is actually out of cards in hand at this point.
Yeah.
This Monk may be all that he has access to.
Perhaps not so surprising an outcome given where Trevor started in this game, but yeah, Benjamin able to, one way or another, find his way to a situation where he has a considerable resource advantage, although it's funny, isn't it, how going first, he's kept this hand, which in most situations against Izzet Prowess you'd love to have, right, as you said, very removal heavy, very reactive, and yet in this situation you actually have a rare window to take the tempo in the game, and you're kind of short on tools to do that because you've got all these reactive spells.
The good news here is Trevor has very little decisions to make. He doesn't have to think and make the right calls. He draws a haste creature off the top and has no other cards in hand. The opponent has no permanents. All right, we're going to play that one and get into the red zone here.
You almost become a spectator. You're like, this deck's playing itself now. I hope it gets there. Let's go.
Benjamin with 2 discard spells stuck in hand against a hellbent opponent decides to fire up the Restless Vents.
Yes, the creature lands. That might help you get rid. That might be the reason why we didn't see those discard spells fired off. I was sort of questioning, like, you've got a spare mana. Surely it doesn't hurt to duress while your opponent had cards back in hand, but you're aware you've got this Vents in play. It's able to rummage away, discard a card, then draw a card. So you have to consider in a red-black deck that doesn't have a ton of actual card advantage in terms of draw to hand, those cards in hand are always potentially something else later in the game if you can get this land fired up. But
Trevor has drawn stock up at the most opportune moments in Game 1 and in Game 2. 3 lands in play, no action in hand. This is the best card you could draw off the top of the library. This is going to get, a land and a 1-drop potentially, or even just 2 spells to be casting next turn. Could be, a Storm Chaser's Talent and a removal spell or something along those lines.
It has been a fairly miraculous recovery from that Mulder 5, but at the same time, Benjamin, even having gone through a lot of those cards in hand and maybe now almost being down cards after this, eventual chain of spells resolves, it is relevant to know as the game progresses, those one-ofs, those huge haymakers that are just kind of lurking in the red-black mid-range list, they become more and more potent as top decks, right? If you see Harvester off the top this game, you will get to drop it. If you see Mishra Reclaimed by Gix or Phyrexian Dragon Engine or Colstoke Gearhulk, all of those cards could come down, immediately change the texture of the game.
Yeah, and here's the duress. We know that Trevor has 1 card in hand. Just clean it up, make sure that there's nothing to stop the attack here with the Restless Vents. And looting away the extra land. We've got 5 lands in play. We don't need a 6th one here. Happy to turn that into another card.
We are very happy to the other card in hand, which appears to be Go for the Throat. So Ben, still on 15 life, definitely in the realm where you can sit on that removal spell for a little while and really make sure you deploy it at an opportune time, either to remove a more potent threat like the Drake Hatcher or the Slick Shot, or at least in response to something like Monstrous Rage, and buy as much life total as you can. A second copy now added to hand. So as long as this land is rummaging away and improving the hand over time, Ben seems to still be able to continue to have the lead, even as the stock up or something improves Trevor's hand.
We see here a bat coming down, revealing the hand, looking to take a card. Only a land there, though. The bat can only take non-land cards. So just a 1-mana, a 1/1 flying lifelink, which, to be perfectly honest, is kind of good in this matchup, especially if you can grow it with an Inti, perhaps.
Yes, I love when the game is so slow that you look at the 1/1 lifelink flyer and go, that's really going to make a difference.
Yeah, that's actually fine here, right? It's a 2 life total swing every single turn.
Yep.
But you could imagine a world where an Inti comes off the top here. And Trevor, in fact, respecting it enough to burst lightning. Of course, getting a prowess trigger here. So, we're removing the creature and dealing an extra damage. Although a go for the throat is pulled off. And now we're down to it. Once again, Trevor with no cards in hand.
That's the Harvester.
Oof.
So this creature is in the deck for a different situation against the prowess decks, I think, giving Trevor, of course, the opportunity to read this. A slightly more rare standard play, though not unheard of. It enters the battlefield and gives all other creatures -2/-2 till end of turn. Also doubles as a nice removal spell early game if you don't think you're going to have the opportunity to hardcast it for 5. But in this situation, just a 5/4 Menace Body, considering your opponent was happy to remove a 1/1 flyer a moment ago, this is a more sizable threat.
It's important to note as well that it was burst lightning that was used on the bat. Which does have the kicker, of course, to deal 4 instead, which could have dealt with this Harvester of Mystery. I actually got the chance to talk to Ben about this Harvester of Mystery and, of course, some Trumpeting Carnosaurs in the deck. There is some interactions with Alesha that he was mentioning, as well as the, is it Go Wild, I believe?
Yeah,
Wild
the
Ride?
harmonized cards, so you can suddenly haste them out of nowhere.
Yes.
It's a trigger for Inti. Whenever you discard a card, both of those are discard-based abilities that can suddenly draw you a card out of nowhere. Most opponents probably not ready for that.
But in this situation, just 5 mana, here's my 5/4.
Sometimes you're like, hey, this got stats.
Yeah. We're
Like-
playing limited now.
Exactly.
Happy with a 5 mana 5/4. And it's coming across with the Restless Fence.
Yeah, both of these creatures, I believe, have Menace, so this Otter out of play as a blocker right now. This is just a ton of damage. Trevor has no choice but to hold, and we are moving
two-turn clock.
suddenly towards the end game. Yeah, after that long, drawn-out exchange of removal spell for card, suddenly all of us, we have this giant monster in play. It's like, right, draw something now or die.
So I believe Trevor here, checking out the graveyard, does have access to level 2 on the Storm Chaser's talent to rebuy a spell. Could be a Torch the Tower, could be a Burst Lightning. I'm not sure if there's anything in there that would get him another turn.
I don't think we've seen Into the Floodmaw this game. I don't know whether they were boarded out or what, but we just haven't managed to find one. And Trevor knows, like, yeah, unfortunately, without the ability to pick up and then kick at the Burst Lightning, none of those cards answer the Harvester of Misery. And so not quite the way we expected, but it does get there in game 2. Great fight put up by Trevor, of course, being at a considerable disadvantage on the draw with a 5-card hand and then immediately becomes a 4-card hand from Duress. But in the end, Ben, you can only beat the opponent in front of you, manages to do that and force a game 3. How are we doing at our other tables here in top 8?
I haven't heard much change. We're still, Samuel Loy, of course, winning the match against Justin Chung, proceeding to the semi-final. Itai versus Sam, the 1v8 seed. Oh, we do have results. We have results from all 3 of the other matches.
That's a really cool thing. First and second seeds both making it through. So the Orzhov Pixie of Sam Lewin, who was the 2 undefeated players from game 1, right? Were the Gruul Delirium and Orzhov Pixie.
Right.
They remain undefeated here on day 2, advancing to the semifinals. We get to see both of them in action, as well as Jennifer Rose Holloway actually taking out the much respected Ben Tubman. Ben Tubman and Justin Chung both being eliminated in quarters. I don't know if anyone would have called that.
Yeah, so we're going to see both of these semifinals, of course. We're definitely going to be watching Green-Red Delirium versus Blue-Black Midrange. And then after that, we'll be watching Sam Lewin versus the winner of the match we have at the table here, Benjamin Graves versus Trevor Georges. They're going into game 3.
That means 4 different decks in semis, which is great fun. Really looking forward to those matches, but we don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, Trevor, of course, playing Is It Prowess. This is the first game in this match that he's going to be on the play.
Yeah, exciting for him, I guess. And with an opportunity after that game was like a real test in your low roll, I guess. Like, how well can you handle adversity? Handled it pretty well. Really stayed in the game for a while. Gave himself every chance to draw out of it. But there's, other than those stock ups you mentioned, not a lot of draws that kind of really lend themselves to a big comeback in building momentum from nothing. Much more prefer to have a strong opening 7, be on the play, and just blow your opponent off the table like we've been seeing Blue-Red do all weekend.
Yeah, Trevor really wants to see that first game again. The 4 Monastery Swift Spears, the Corey Steel Cutter with 3 triggers.
Yeah.
We haven't seen a slick shot show off from him yet. Of course, there is only 2 in the main deck, as well as the 2 Drake hatches.
Yeah, do you have anything to say about that adjustment we saw from both him and Justin Chung?
We've seen quite a few players moving from the, 4 Swift Spear is a sure thing, as well as 4 Cutter and 4 Storm Chaser Talon, of course. But some players on 4 Slick Shot Show Off, some players on 2 in the main, 2 of them and 2 Drake hatches, all of the 75s have some Drake Hatches in the sideboard at least. The split of Drake Hatches and Slickshot Show-Offs, I've heard it's good for the mirror.
Yeah, it seems like a case where the field, as we saw, is either blue-red prowess or people who are pretty heavily hedging to beat blue-red prowess because it's sort of the expected top deck based on those past event results you mentioned. And the cards that a lot of people, depending on their color access, are using against this deck are High Noon and Authority of the Consoles, both of which are debilitating to Slickshot Show-Off. They basically turn the card off outright. So going down on Slickshot Show-Offs, which also suffer a bit in the mirror from their vulnerability to removal, and bringing in the more reliable card Drake Hatcher, which does not die to the main deck removal spells, only the sort of a braid from the side, can get you a considerable advantage if it's alive for a turn or two by generating those Drake tokens. It kind of pre-boards you against both the mirror and those sideboard cards from your opponents.
Well, it looks like we're ready to draw some 7s here. We've had lovely opportunities to see what Trevor's drawing. We'll see if we can catch Benjamin. No, picking him up and immediately out of view of the camera. Trevor, on the other hand, we have 3 lands, a Show-Off, a Cutter, a Talent, and I believe that's a Lithomantic Barrage at the... No, it's a Monastery Swift Spear. Okay.
So another threat-heavy hand.
Yeah. Turn 1, we've got an Otter. It's got Prowess.
Interesting to lead on the... I guess you have the basic island. Could have led on the Swift Spear there. I feel like a lot of people... Okay, I lead with my Prowess creature and then play the Prowess triggering spell turn 2, but wanting the haste damage to burst later in the game?
Yeah, that would be my thought here, but we also really want to play the Cutter out as soon as we can. Of course. And we're choosing to plot the Slickshot Show-Off. So next turn, we're going to get the Cutter down. We're going to get the Slickshot Show-Off down as the second spell for turn. And then even the Swift Spear as well.
Yeah.
Unless this bat has something to say about it. We're seeing the whole hand here. We're seeing 2 lands and a Swift Spear and a Cutter.
Yep.
And boy howdy, everyone is happy to take a Cutter out of hand these days.
I'm sure Trevor is excited to have dodged that turn 1 removal spell. You think maybe I am just going to get to land all of these cards from my opening hand and potentially land a knockout blow early, or at least get my opponent on the ropes. But that bat comes in real big here, taking away the powerful Corey Steel Cutter. Still have to respect the Slickshot Show-Off. And these plotted 2-drops have been a real problem for a lot of opponents over the weekend. Trevor, though, happy to immediately deploy it. Has 3 lands on turn 3. So now you see how much can we cash in this bird for. It often only gets the 1 attack, but that 1 attack is devastating.
So he's drawn a braid for turn, which means he could right here, he's played the Slickshot Show-Off. He could now play the Swift Spear, a braid the bat, and get in for a lot of damage. The problem is that this would then leave a Cutter in hand with no second spell, and this would leave you super open to Brotherhood's End, which you saw not 1 but 2 of in the last match.
Yeah, look, you could just try to fade that from Ben's hand. Obviously, the only 2 in the deck, there's not a guarantee he draws it, but you're very scared of it. And it's just that slight awkwardness of sequencing. Like, okay, the blue-red deck doesn't quite play itself because, of course, if you play out the Slick Shot and then abrade the bat, you've missed your second spell trigger for the Cutter. But if you try and get the Cutter down first, then you've already played your Slick Shot. You're not going to be able to get the value in full from that. So, yeah, I like the decision to leave the Corey Steel Cutter there as a bit of a bonus. If the Brotherhood's End goes off, you'll get that back to hand, and you can start to rebuild the board.
This is an interesting spot here. Benjamin playing out a second bat. Trevor has 1 spell, 1 land in hand. And the reaction to any discard spell is always, oh, I'll play the spell that's in my hand. We're going to kill this bat. We're going to get the Corey Steel Cutter back into hand. And then the other bat would take the same thing.
And so Trevor makes the decision to kill the new bat rather than leave a bat in. I guess either way, you end up with a bat in play with the Steel Cutter under it. He sort of gestured at both bats like, it doesn't really matter what I do.
The difference here is that he's chosen to leave Benjamin with the tapped bat rather than the untapped bat. Which
that's relevant.
A better position to be in, leaving the bat tapped means that, if you were to draw opt into opt, your opponent doesn't have the chance to block this Slick Shot Show-Off, for example.
So this is a situation that looks quite perilous for Benjamin. I think he missed his 3rd land drop there. And obviously having the bat, like having some interaction is nice, and having some lifelink is nice, but you're already down to 10, and your opponent has 4 creatures in play. You really are hoping you can land Brotherhood's End and that there's no spell piece here, because even beyond its ability to clear away artifacts that we saw in the other game, you're running out of time to exchange removal spells 1 for 1 with these creatures. Maybe if you have double spell here with Torch the Tower, but 2 mana removal means that you are hard-pressed to keep up with all of these cheap prowess threats from the blue-red deck.
We can see a 3rd land in hand, and I believe there's a Brotherhood's End lurking at the back there. And that is, as you mentioned, going to clean up all these creatures, including your bat. You'll give back the Cutter, And you have to worry about these Storm Chasers talents, right? They're both on the board with, at level 1.
Yeah.
And they can pick up this Abrade, so it's going to be really hard for you to stick a threat over the next couple of turns.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that if you can play that Virgin play Brotherhood Zend, I don't think there's a world that you don't do it. You love to wait and duress and try and see that the way is clear for it, but at 10 life, I'd be terrified of either losing or going to so low life that I'm picked off by Burst Lightning later. So you might have to fire it off and hope, and then obviously you're thinking, okay, well then next turn, if he picks up the Abrade, if he does this, do I have outs? Is there another way? Don't want to waste your last chance to advance through the top 8 here on a hasty play.
And Trevor, once again, has managed to engineer a situation where he doesn't have to make very many decisions. With no cards in hand, he doesn't have to stress about what do I do during Benjamin's turn. Do I do this? Do I do this? Benjamin has to cook at every single point that he has priority and decide which of these 7 cards in my hand is worth playing now. Which of them should I, wait and play next turn? If I was to play them, what order do I play in? What do I target with them? Trevor, you can see him. He's sitting back. He's comfortable. He's got his arms clasped ahead of him.
Oh. Inti is going to be able to grow this bat and at least increase the life gain, which is an interesting sort of a longer play, right? If you can keep the bat alive, you know that this is going to add up to more saved life over time and more cards to potentially draw out of this scenario than you would find by just removing an otter token or something else small. I guess that's the upside of your opponent having played out their whole hand, having already made all their sequencing decisions, is now Benjamin does have access to that information. You're not worried about, oh, well, what if I do this and then it just gets into the flood mode back to hand and I get nothing. You're at least able to say, well, whatever's on the top of your deck, you better hope it's good because you can't rebuy and cast that Abrade this turn.
So Benjamin attacked with the bat, triggered the Inti, discarded a fear of missing out, revealed a fear of missing out. Which he didn't have the mana to cast, has drawn an obliterating bolt here.
Interesting removal to have, extra ways to get through blocker sided in and especially to exile and deal with those larger sort of graveyard-oriented creatures out of the red-black deck and not have to worry about something like an Alicia picking them up later on. Here, perfectly happy to use it on a bat, though. Get that lifelink out of the way and give me that Steel Cutter back. And, hey, I've already cast 1 spell for turn, so I reckon I might also make another fairly easy decision if I'm in Trevor's seat.
I'm not sold that it's an easy decision, though. If you play this Corey Steel Cutter here, that is the second spell for turn, and it's not in play to see the second spell.
That's true, but you do have it in play now, so it's not going to get battered or duressed away again, and it gives you a prowess trigger here. If your opponent was on 20 life, you might delay playing the Steel Cutter, but you're like, this is worth an extra 3 damage at bare minimum, and almost guarantees that even if you Brotherhood's End, you can only choose one of the 2 modes.
It's true.
So if you sweep away my board, okay, I don't have a Monk token right now, but I'm threatening you with Monk tokens in future. It's pretty easy with those talents in play to set up a turn 1 or 2 turns from now where you're back on the board and attacking, but at least Benjamin is able to stay alive at 1 life. So now dead to top deck Burst Lightning or any haste creature, but at the very least, you have to have it. I'll make you have that card.
Yeah, well, Trevor with a lot of live draws here. Just something as simple as
sleight of
a sleight of hand, for example, if we can find
if this isn't 2 lands, I don't think there's a card in your deck you can find that you couldn't cast that's not a land off here, and it's...
Okay, well, we're going to take a land. Is it an untapped land so that we can perhaps Storm Chaser's talent? We're choosing not to Storm Chaser's talent here.
Well,
thinking?
Trevor just kind of, I think, just blown away for a second. Both players shocked that the match is still going.
We saw yesterday on coverage there was quite a few players that went to 1 and then managed to stabilize their board and win the match from 1 HP.
Most of those players had ways to gain life, though, or at least had counter spells that let them say, well, if I get Burst Lightning, I can negate this, I can get around it. Benjamin is just flying by the seat of his pants here, clinging to that last thread of hope. Is Trevor... Okay, we're pausing. I agree with you. It's a little bit surprising we didn't see the Storm Chaser's talent activation, right? Because clearly the limiting factor here is, do I have enough mana and access to cards to trigger the Corey Steel Cutter on my next turn? And if you activate the talent, you can pick up something like Sleight of Hand and give yourself a very strong chance of hitting what you missed this turn.
Well, let's talk about what Benjamin needs to do here. We've said that there's a lot of live draws for Trevor. Obviously, we can see here on the screen the Burst Lightnings, the Haste threats, any cantrip into another spell. Of course, the Storm Chaser's talent has the ability to get some of these back as well. What can Benjamin do? Is there any sort of life gain we're looking at? Obviously, the bats have a lifelink. Is there anywhere else we can get out of?
It's a little fringe, but there's 2 copies potentially, if they're not sideboarded, of Mishra claimed by Gix, which I'll forgive myself for not remembering earlier, but that does have an attack trigger where you gain life equal to the number of attacking creatures. Now, again, like the bat, that's a pretty slight difference maker, but if you can gain even 2 life to be out range of a normal burst lightning, then gain a couple more, be out range of a kickered burst lightning or an unbuffed swift spear, it's going to take a lot, right? Because these little bits of life gain aren't going to get you out of range of these cards immediately. You're going to want to also have blockers because this Corey Steelcutter is going to be coming in at you sometime with trample, with haste. But at start of the long road back for Benjamin as we play this Inti.
That's right. So Trevor has drawn another sleight of hand off the top here, looking at another 2 cards. One of them was a land,
another
one of them
2
was a red
lands,
spell.
I think.
I don't know what the red spell was here. It is a swift spear,
oh, it was
and that's
a swift
going to make a second haste creature. So Benjamin did manage to play a blocker, which would have been good if it was sleight of hand into something else.
But
does Benjamin have a removal spell here for one of these hasty creatures?
2 mana, he's representing it, blocks the cheap one, and has the Anoint.
Has the Anoint, okay.
So not only able to survive that attack, but eats up the Swift Spear. That was an attempt by Trevor, and I don't blame Trevor, right? You go for that.
Yeah, you go for it, for sure.
But it's so good for Benjamin to be able to hold onto that blocker and basically advance in terms of relative board state. Although that Duress, not the best spell for the moment. You'd love to be able to loot that one away, but attacking is very risky here.
So now Benjamin has the chance, if he chooses to spend this second Brotherhood's End, just 1 for 1, remove that Corey Steelcutter, get it off the table. You've got to wonder if that's good enough, though.
Well, considering you're on 1 life still and how many haste threats your opponent has, maybe you just hope that you can dodge the Steelcutter triggering for another turn. But and this is another way to get rid of it. Dreadmore's Ire. This was one of my fringe tech picks for the weekend where I wasn't sure if we'd see players adopting it, a way to not only acquire trample in some of these aggro matchups, but to clear away Corey Steelcutter ultra efficiently. A weird little combat trick that buffs the damage from Inti, but more importantly allows it to destroy target artifact that player controls if it connects. And normally the beating on this card is that it's vulnerable to removal on the creature you're trying to combat trick. But as Trevor's empty-handed, Benjamin finds the exact right time to chomp down on that Steelcutter and get the threat off the board while holding up that sweeper you mentioned.
Yeah, and then the ability to follow up with fear of missing out means that we're not even worried about another Monastery Swift Spear. I guess at this point, we're now only worried about Slick Shot Show Off or Burst Lightning. So we are closing the number of options that Trevor has to end this game right here. Of course, Trevor does have some long game options. 2 Storm Chasers talent can return these Sleight of Hands, can return Obliterating Bolt or a Braid. Going for Sleight of Hand on this turn just because of the ability to cast it now. And we see another land and a Torch the Tower. Taking the Torch. Don't have the land to play this turn to fire it off and affect the board, though.
I believe Trevor's draw for turn was Ghost Vacuum as well. So obviously it's nice. Maybe you're limiting the damage you're about to take from this fear of missing out, but chose to go for the Slight Plan instead, maybe ending the game on the spot. And is this Benjamin's counting up the Delirium here?
We do have Delirium. There's a fear of missing out in the graveyard, as well as an instant in the Dreadmore's Ire, and plenty of sorceries, Brotherhood's End, Duress, and others.
So Benjamin may not be gaining life here, but he is decreasing the number of draws Trevor has left to try and find a way out of this situation. This is a lot of damage coming in, and Trevor's extending the hand.
No, I mean, the creature land's coming in.
Okay, I was wondering, it seemed like we were maybe moving to the attack without the creature land, but on the second combat, we see that land get in. And what a comeback for Benjamin, just staying alive by the skin of his teeth. And Trevor, with absolute grace there, handling a difficult situation. Wow, what a quarterfinal.
Yeah, it's I got to tell you, going to 1 life is the secret. We've seen it 3 times on coverage this weekend. We're going to come back into the booth, talk about this matchup, and have another look at our semi-finals. Welcome back into the commentary booth here. I'm Jim Dowling. I'm joined by Thomas Anderson. What a quarterfinal that was. That was glorious. That was a lot of back and forth.
Yeah.
Players with no cards, players with no life. We didn't know who was going to win.
1 life to 0 in that final game. It's about as close as you could draw it up, right? And not only to be on 1 life, but from like 1 swing and then you crack back. To sit there on 1 life, like absolutely gripping the table, white knuckle all the way, any burst lightning or haste creature off the top, and then and Trevor even got to check at one point, right, with the Swift Spear, and just happened to have blocker, Anoint to survive, and then that red-black deck, we did see a little hint there. I'm sure he didn't go down to 1 every game against Prowess, but that red-black deck has been battle-tested in the Prowess matchup, and we could see the potential. if you can hang in there long enough, these late game cards, whether it's the creature lands activating, the increased card selection from all of the looting and rummaging you're doing, and just the big haymakers like that Harvester of Misery in game 2, you can turn the game off in a hurry once you get to that point.
Well, we now know what both of our semi-finals look like. We know that we're going to have Sam Lewin against Benjamin Graves there as the winner of that other quarterfinal. And down at the bottom of the bracket, we're going to have Samuel Loy versus Jennifer Rose Holloway. We're going to be featuring both of these matchups. We've got Green-Red Delirium against Blue-Black Midrange. We've got White-Black Pixie against Rakdos Midrange. And you know what we don't have left in the entire tournament? Oculus, Prowess, Jeskai Control, Zur, any of the big players.
Yeah, all of the top decks for the metagame. I mean, don't get us wrong. They were well represented. They posted results, but that's the funny thing about Top 8 Cut. Like, it's such a small sample of the field. You are open a little bit to variance, or in this case, it seems like a couple of silver bullet decks that have been really well judged for the metagame. This red-black deck, like, it can't just be chalked up to a fluke anymore. It has great legs. It has good answers to what the format's doing. And the same is true, obviously, the blue-black mid-range deck. Slightly more of a known quantity, but it's that kind of deck where you can tinker and tune from week to week, and it seems like Jennifer Rose Holloway has really been on the secret sauce to advance this weekend. I'm also really excited, a little bit biased perhaps as a white-black player myself, towards that Pixie deck that's been undefeated all weekend, although I worry about the matchup against specifically this red-black deck, just the sort of mix of cheap interaction and high-end threats against the temporary lockdown plan that forces you to discard cards is going to be very interesting.
Well, that's the end of our quarterfinal coverage. We're going to be back shortly with the semi-finals and, of course, the final. We'll see you then.